Hello, I'm Melisa Idris.
And I'm Sharaad Kuttan.
Welcome to Consider This. Today marks the 20th anniversary of the news portal Malaysia Kini. So joining us on the show, I'm delighted to introduce to you the CEO of the news portal, Pramesh Chandran. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Melisa, Sharaad. Thanks for having me.
Happy anniversary, happy 20th anniversary. It's been 20 years since Malaysia Kini was first started in 1999, I think born out of the flames of the Reformasi movement. And you know, I mean, 20 years of operations, you've been through so much, multiple raids. I think you've had to deal with many court appearances. You've been dragged to court many times.
Refusal entry of your reporters into press conferences, having your computers hauled away.
Yeah,
Yes, I mean, all those stories.
It's a different time now, and I think we forget just how different. So take us back 20 years, Prem, and talk to us about the setting up of Malaysia Kini, because I think what we fail to forget is that Malaysia Kini started out as an online publication at a time when social media had yet to be invented, when we didn't have smartphones in our pockets. So tell us about 20 years ago when you started out Malaysia Kini, and kind of fast forward very quickly comparing to today.
Yeah, we started off with just 6 people, in an old shop house in Section 14. And the idea was that, at that time, Dr. Mahathir had promised not to censor the internet, had a special Bill of Rights. Whereas, of course, the mainstream media was pretty much controlled, either directly or through their allies, etc. So we decided on the wake of Reformasi, obviously there's a need for more independent media, and that is why we chose the online route to get started.
Right, but there was also, I guess, a time when the internet was new to a lot of Malaysians. Penetration rates couldn't have been that high, but you staked your future on a yet to be proven proposition, which was the internet.
If I could just add, 1999 when it first started, that was the time of blogs, right? So no Wikipedia, no Facebook, not even Friendster, MySpace, not yet invented. So this was way back before then.
This was really this is a time of dial-up modems.
Dial-up
modem, and they had to manually upload a page, and which took minutes. There was no such thing as internet publishing. When you download a page, you click and you wait for seconds. The page will then appear, right? So this was really long time ago. Definitely, there was much lower penetration, but the surprising thing is that we grew very fast. In fact, we hit 100,000 readers a day within 8 months, and we didn't realize it. It was actually an advertising company who was tracking us, who showed us that data. So very quickly, purely by recommendation by email, Malaysia Kini gathered such a big audience, showing that there was a real demand for independent media in the country.
When you talk about independent media, when you and Stephen Gunn started Malaysia Kini back in '99, the idea was to give, to fill a gap which you say was where without government control, right? So government control media was available, but you wanted to give the unvarnished truth, so to speak. Talk to me about how what that meant to you at that point in time, because this was coming up from the Reformasi movement, right? What was that gap filling?
Well, both Steve and I had worked in the mainstream media in the Sun. And Sharaad,
we were colleagues.
We were colleagues at the Sun together.
At the Sun.
And there was some amount of limitations. You could say certain things you couldn't, right? There were limits that editors placed on us. And what we saw, what happened with Anwar Ibrahim, it was very clear that even the most powerful people in this country can be brought down, and the media will then only give one line of what was happening. But we strongly believe that if you give both sides of the story, Malaysians will start seeing things differently, and this country can move towards democracy. And without democracy, you can't have accountability, you can't cut back on corruption, those sort of things. So our belief was if we started a portal where we were known, we put our names to it, unlike other blogs which were often anonymous. We had reporters going to the scene, asking the questions, and trying our best to report both sides. That was a mission. We also wanted to do the news fast, because we believed speed was an advantage. If we were to give people the news today straight away, then whether you kind of liked it or not liked Malaysia Kini, you'd still read Malaysia Kini. And using speed, we would be able to set the agenda, the news agenda for the day, much before anybody sees the 8 o'clock news the evening or the next day's newspapers.
Right. I mean, what is interesting is, there were the Mahazalims and these kinds of blogs. Like you said, they were anonymous. They often posted, information wasn't entirely verifiable. So you come in, you bring in journalistic ethics and best practices into the internet sphere at that point in time, for Malaysia at least. But there was also this element of activism. Right? Many of the journalists were also partisan, right? And how does that work out? Because, people perhaps might be asking you, and they definitely asked you those days, were you just anti-government? Were you pro-opposition? And so on and so forth. I mean, that activist element, is that something that you wanted or had to deal with?
I think we definitely attracted people with a mission, who wanted to speak the truth to power, to be independent. We spoke to many people in the mainstream who were grumbling, but they didn't want to join us. We were a startup. They had their cushy jobs. So we attracted people who had a good sense of the mission, and definitely because we were talking about human rights, about abuses of power, we were seen to be speaking the same language as the opposition. We always said we're not partisan, we're not part of the opposition, but we would speak truth to power and raise these issues. So it came to a big surprise that after Dr. Mahathir stepped down, he gave us an interview, or he asked to be interviewed in 2004 because he was actually shut out of his own mainstream media after stepping down in power, and we're happy to actually give him a voice. So again recently when Najib Razak lost,
you had an interview.
We were the first local
Malaysia
media
Kini,
to interview him after his loss, and he came to our offices. So we are happy to tell both sides of the story. Even now I think we were most vocal on issues like things like Lainas, on Penang, many things where there is current concerns with the current government. Malaysia Kini is the one who's sort of covering those news items.
Has it meant a pivot in the way Malaysia Kini has had to report things? Because once what you were seen to be opposition friendly, and now these same people are now in power, and you're reporting, keeping them in check. Has it made a difference in the way you've reported?
Not really. I think it's really much in our DNA to ask the tough questions. If you talk to our reporters, they got there, they have the mics, and they're in the faces of the ministers asking, kind of tough questions. Yeah. So even if we ask them to be polite, they just can't. They've been brought up and trained to ask those kind of tough questions. They won't do something which is frivolous. So I think that, even for example, when Pakatan took the Penang and Selangor government, if you ask then Chief Minister Guaneng or Khalid Ibrahim Azmin, they'll say Malaysia Kini is always the toughest to handle because we will ask the most pointed questions.
Were you ever accused of being partisan, not in terms of the Barisan Nasional Pakatan Rakyat, then Pakatan Harapan sort of divide, but then that you were partisan towards some factions within Pakatan? I mean, you ever get that accusation leveled at you?
Definitely, we always accuse, the PKR person, people will say we are with DAP. DAP say we are PKR, Azmin says we are pro, Rafizi, and then, there's always these factions here and there, right? Whenever there's an intra-party election. So, it comes with the territory. I think we all get those accusations. But, if you know anybody who has worked in Malaysia Kini's editorial desk, they will tell you that we're very open. Things are discussed openly. If anybody has a view to point out, they can point it out. And there are no calls coming in from anywhere else telling our reporters what to do.
Very quickly, Prem, before we go to break, you said at the beginning there were 6 people. Malaysia Kini started out 6 people. What is Malaysia Kini today?
Today we're at 120, and I'm proud of the 6. Of course, it's me and Stephen, but one of our cadet reporters, Arjinder, now has come back to work with us at Kini Academy. So now she's teaching journalism after all these years.
All right, we're going to come back and talk about Malaysia Kini in Malaysia Baru. Stay tuned to Consider This. Welcome back to Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris, with me Sharaad Kutan. We are speaking to the CEO of the news portal Malaysia Kini, Pramesh Chandran's on the show. Malaysia Kini is celebrating 20 years, and we wanted to talk about the change because in the last 2 years, 1.5 years now, it's been such a dramatic change in the media landscape. What does operating a news portal, I guess non-mainstream news portal, mean in Malaysia Baru?
That's a good question.
I mean, people might say, actually, now you are the mainstream. And in fact, Malaysia Kini has become mainstream. In fact, the idea of a mainstream alternative might have dissolved some time ago.
Correct.
Yeah, we like to think that the mainstream have become like Malaysia Kini. They've had to adopt our ways of doing stuff, to be more independent and objective in their reporting. And to credit to them, I think they have also evolved. I see, our competition, really improving and doing much more better reporting. So credit to them. But yes, for us, Malaysia Kini we don't like the duality between alternative and mainstream. It's just about being professional and being independent, regardless of who you are, and that's what we've tried to do all these years. To your question, what has changed? Definitely, it's more competitive. Everybody's doing, good quality media. So Malaysia Kini ourselves have to, lift ourselves and do even better and compete in a level playing field. So that's tougher. But from a business angle, previously a lot of advertisers, others would stay away because Malaysia Kini was seen to be a bit, too political, a bit too dangerous in its reporting. So doing business today is much easier. We have lots of tie-ups with corporations and business, and those sort of partnerships are growing. So that part is easier. But the pressure on us is also now to think about, of course we were tied, perhaps not so much to political parties, but in a way we were tied to this voice for democracy. People wanting a more open, democratic Malaysia. That movement was something which Malaysia Kini in a way represented. So now that's kind of finished and over, the question is where do we position ourselves and how do we grow? Right. We are small, we're about 120 people, but our competitors are much bigger, right? In terms of, which can be good and bad.
And some of them are, many of them are actually downsizing quite dramatically. I do want to ask you this because I think there's a contention, there's a debate about whether things have changed or not. What's dramatically changed is perhaps the feel that this is a much more free country. Yeah. But on the ground, ownership structures have not changed largely with the media. The people in charge have not changed. So
you mean editorially in charge?
Yeah, okay. Editorially in charge as well. So you see the TV Tigas of the world and all these other outlets, ours included, perhaps either change or not, right? So, I mean, do you think there has been a dramatic change in the way, the news is presented, the priorities of local media?
I think from the media perspective, one hand they look to their owners and to the audience. From the ownership point of view, I think the owners now, whatever their past political affiliations are, want to be on good terms with the current government. So they would kind of like move themselves a little bit on one hand.
So they're still slavish to power?
I won't say slavish to power. I think they don't want to be too confrontational, so they would move, they would adjust. I won't use the word slavish, right? I think on the other hand, the other part is the audience, and the audience demanding good independent journalism.
Is that true though, Prem? I'm just wondering whether the audience is demanding more investigative pieces, more good quality, long form journalism, as opposed to very quick clickbaity headlines, very political, he said, she said type of reporting.
I think the audience, definitely there is time pressure. They do want independent journalism. Independent journalism can be short. I think we need to differentiate between independent journalism and long-form journalism. There is an appetite for long-form journalism, but that takes a bit of time to read through, and perhaps over the weekend. On a busy day, yes, it is more bite-sized information, but they still want that to be independent. They want it to be balanced. They want it to be accurate. So I think that the audience today does demand the media in Malaysia shift towards the middle and give much more balanced reporting. And I think media, whoever the owners are responding to that demand.
Yeah, before we get into the question of One MDB and how it really changed the landscape, just a very quick note on state-owned media. I mean, the public broadcasters, have we seen a real change in the conversation? We don't yet have a charter for RTM and Berdama. We don't have the sense that they will emerge as independent institutions, separate from the government of the day. What are your thoughts on that?
I think you're right. I think the government still sees government-owned media as a voice of the government, putting forward government policies. Whether that changes to be an independently, run in public service media, that's a different model. And the government has not said that that's the direction they're heading towards. So I am obviously in favor for much more public service media. So hands-off, publicly owned media, which reports based on what's going on in the country. But that's a debate to come. And now, with the political stress in the country, we do not know whether the government is willing to head in that direction. But I think that the people want that. The people want credible media, whether it's privately owned or publicly owned. And the longer the publicly owned media does not move in that direction, the less viewers they're going to get and the less influence they have.
I'm glad you brought up 1MDB a little bit earlier, Sharaad, because again, that really changed the way people expected the media to report. And I wonder whether the media dropped the ball. Some media dropped the ball in reporting about 1MDB. When it comes to investigative journalism, the argument is often said that it's too expensive to pour resources into this. Malaysia Kini has done investigative journalist pieces. Is that true? Is that assumption true, that it is expensive? It is an expensive endeavor to fund?
Speaking as the CEO of the company, it's extremely expensive. I definitely, the editorial team would like to do much more investigative reporting. They will want much more resources to that. In the last 1 year, we have shifted in that direction. We have a news lab team who's doing much more, series and in-depth pieces and long-form journalism. There was a series we do on Pasir Gudang, on Orang Asli. Many of the issues on May 13th, we did one. We're doing more of it, but it is expensive. And it's not only a resource, it's also a matter of access to information. So in Malaysia, it's very difficult to get a lot of information we need to do investigative journalism. So I think those are two barriers, but as journalists, as media, we need to do more of it.
Okay, let's just very quickly talk about some of the gains that have been made, the concrete gains that have been made for the media as a whole since GE14. I mean, do you think on balance there have been substantial gains?
I think it's a much more freer environment. I think we feel it. I think all the, the reports, the indexes, the rankings show Malaysia now to be, a free media within Southeast Asia. I think the freest. So definitely, I think that is something which has improved. On the commercial terms, it's very tough. I think advertising is not there. So without resources, even if you have freedom, you may not be able to do professional media. So it's both a matter of having the political freedoms and having the revenue to do good media.
It's the business model. Is that it? It's the business model is we haven't quite worked out a sustainable, profitable business model?
Definitely, I think all over the world we see the same situation, that media is under financial pressure and there's retrenchments, etc. But in terms of the political space, I think we've been given a lot of political space. There's been a robust discussion and reporting. I don't think the government has pressed us on anything or tried to censor us in any way. The government has stated in its manifesto and the minister about setting up a media council, which we are working on. It hasn't come to fruition yet, but we are eagerly awaiting the media council. Yes. And also a freedom of information bill, which will get us more information and therefore to do more investigative reporting.
Okay, we're going to continue this conversation in just a couple of minutes. Make sure you don't go away right here on Astro AWANI. Welcome back to Consider This. Melisa and Sharaad here with you, and we're talking to Pramesh Chandran, the CEO of Malaysia Kini, celebrating its 20th anniversary. Now, just before the break, Prem, you were talking a little bit about the Press Council as well as the Freedom of Information Act. Are those things that you see coming up on the horizon?
Yes, I think definitely the government has said they will move forward with the Media Council. There have been a number of discussions. A number of organizations, including the publishers, the journalists, the lawyers, have submitted bills or recommendations. We had a meeting with the minister earlier this year, and all that's been put together. And now I understand it's with either with the Attorney General or going to go to Cabinet. After which, hopefully, it comes soon.
I mean, one of the big issues, because when talking about the Press Council, is the presumption that self-regulation is better than government regulation coming from the state, right? I mean, that's one thing. But the issue of the composition of press council is also contentious, because it could become an all-boys club of owners rather than have space for the public and other interested groups, often left out marginal because they don't own media and so on and so forth. So from your point of view, what is the best model on balance? What kind of voices ought to be on the press council?
I think that on one hand you do need a sizable media involvement. These are people who in the industry, their lives depend on it. There's a lot about finance and revenue. There are many other concerns. So as kind of like an industry organization, the participation of the industry is really important, and it's split. You have radio, you have television, you have online, many forms. So you have many languages. So to make sure those voices are represented is very important. But I do agree that journalists, editors, academics, and the public at large should be also involved. They definitely need to bring those voices in to talk about, it's basically both the supply side and the demand side. Only then it will be a more holistic media council addressing the issues. And there are serious issues to be addressed. For example, with misinformation or fake news or things like that. Where do you draw the line between freedom of speech and where do you then penalize fake news or disinformation campaigns? There are a lot of issues to be dealt with on the commercial side as well. There's a lot of investment needed to do to train journalists. There are a lot of organizations that need to be more digital, and so there's a lot of work to do. And I think all sides need to come to the table. When we looked at all the proposals submitted, there were actually no substantial differences. That was really good. Everybody agreed on the core principles, the idea of a more self-regulated media, more responsible media. Everybody's in agreement. So, and I think the government is also in agreement. That's a good thing.
But you as CEO of Malaysia Kini, you look after the business side, right?
Yes.
What about the commercial concerns? You touched on that a bit earlier. Are there, as a businessman yourself, do you look at, are there certain red flags that have come up for you?
Definitely, the question is how do we make the returns, right? That is the question. How do we manage advertising, subscription models, audits of circulation? There are lots of issues that go into the Media Council. We have an audit bureau of circulations, those sort of numbers are very important. And then obviously a Media Council will need to have a complaints bureau, which in fact, take in complaints from the public and allow for redress. But at the same time, that cannot be too much of a burden to the organization. We can't be spending 3/4 of our time dealing with complaints.
Public complaints.
Right? So those balances are critical for the financial success. And when I say financial success, I mean we have to be successful with credibility, not just be profitable and ignore the credibility of the media.
Right.
That's going to be a disaster.
I mean, what's great is to hear there's a consensus on the core values, or at least the press council. Now, when it comes to freedom of information, we know that the Pakatan Harapan governments of Selangor and I believe also Penang, experimented with their own Freedom of Information Act, and it was heavily criticized for really not having enough muscle, right, and in not providing the opportunity for the public to interrogate government and its decisions, how it spends money and so on. Where is that Freedom of Information Act going? Is there a consensus? This is not a government, even under Pakatan Harapan, given to necessary to being transparent or having accountability forced upon them. So.
Yes, I totally agree. Maybe there's not yet a consensus on freedom of information. I think there are two concerns. On the government's concern, where do you draw a line on transparency? I think that's the question. And the question is, what amount of resources do you provide to make information transparent? From what I understand, the government is going towards digitization and digital transformation. So they may see these things to come first before a Freedom of Information Act. On the other hand, we believe that both should go together. We should not have to wait. Right. So I think that we would really try to encourage the government to think that transparency is a core value of governance. When you have transparency, you build up credibility. When you have credibility, people will vote for you. So
hopefully, yes, that is the assumption.
That is the assumption. So we would really try to persuade the government that this is the right direction to go for.
Okay, all right. In the few minutes that we have left, I really want to talk about Malaysia Kini's way forward because, in the last 20 years, you've invested a lot in technology. You've placed a lot of bets on using data and analytics. What is next for Malaysia Kini? Where do you see yourself next?
I think definitely we will invest in more long-form journalism, whether it's investigative journalism, data journalism, feature writing, we're even looking at making, more video, which is slightly more long-form video. I think that especially long-form video has the opportunity for people to really understand a topic in more depth. I think news
is that going against the current media trends? I mean, I read somewhere that our average attention span is the first 30 seconds. Actually, even less than that, 15 seconds or so.
I think the studies I've seen are a little bit of both. When it comes to like immediate stuff, our attention is really short. But a lot of people are also sitting down, with Netflix, and watching, entire episode or
documentary
entire season, right?
Entire season, right? So I think the question is that if you make something a little bit entertaining and engaging, people are actually willing to sit down for long hours and be informed of an issue which they care about. So which they don't get in the news bite.
Okay.
So
more
I think
context, right?
Yes, I think it's like kind of a news bite to stay in touch with what's happening every day, and then good long-form journalism to be informed about the critical issues.
Okay, last question, half second for you to answer. Malaysia Kini always very serious, very earnest. Are you guys gonna get sexy in the future? Are you just gonna remain your kind of straight jack, very kind of proper?
What does sexy mean to Sharaad Kuttan?
We are sexy, Sharaad.
Are you?
Okay. No, I think definitely we things will change. Both Steve and I have worked in Malaysia Kini for 20 years. So, and internet's a very young thing, digital is a very young thing. So things will have to move, things will have to change, and we will have to redefine how we do things, the formats that we do. But the mission about doing good journalism, fair, balanced, informative, that will not change. So we'll stick to that, and who knows where we will be, what kind of format, but we'll definitely safeguard our principles of journalism.
All right, there you go. That's all the time we have on the show tonight. Thank you so much for being with us on the show, Prem. It's been a pleasure. Congratulations on the 20 years. I'm Melisa Idris, with me Sharaad Kuttan. We're signing off tonight. We'll be back with another episode of Consider This tomorrow. See you then.